Thank you so much. Shall we get started? Yeah, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you coming in, and I hope together we'll go on a journey of Russian choral music in the 20th century. For some of you who were present at my earlier lecture on Rachmaninoff and Taneyev and Sizelnikov and their orchestral/choral pieces, this will show you a different view. These are predominantly a cappella pieces. Some of them are just choral miniatures, some others are extracts from larger scale works. What you see there as a cover picture is a beautiful hall called Rachmaninoff Hall of Moscow Conservatory. This is where a lot of music was taking place, especially on the brink between the 19th and 20th century, when that was the place of synodal choir and synodal college, which raised church musicians and church conductors. And then later on, this hall was named after Rachmaninoff. I don't know if you can see, but up there by the ceiling, there are big holes in there. And because of those particular things, the acoustic in this Rachmaninoff hall is fantastic. And I performed a lot in there as a member of a choir and also as a conductor. And we often performed standing up on the balconies and then singing down, looking at the audience from upstairs down. And this hall is like a sacred place for Russian musicians. There's of course the big hall of Moscow Conservatory and many others, but this one has a particular special place. I'm going to start off with talking about Taneyev. In general, when I was thinking, what I can tell you about the Russian music, one can put a whole year worth of lectures on Russian music. If you go down to Znamenny chant and then to Bartnyansky, Berezovsky and the choral concerto, you then go into Glinka and the Mighty Five, operas, and many other pieces, Tchaikovsky, and then of course the rest of the 19th century and the 20th centuries and beyond. So it's just enormous. So I'm certainly not even trying to accomplish all of this in the time span of just one hour. Which is why I've selected a few composers who I'm hoping you would enjoy listening to some of those pieces which perhaps were unknown to you before. So last time we talked about Taneyev and we talked about his large-scale works. Whilst now I'd like to draw your attention to some of his choral miniatures or pieces a cappella, of which he composed quite a lot. So altogether there were 37 pieces, and in fact I've got them all here. So that's 2 volumes of Taneyev books with a huge number of compositions there. A lot of them are depicting scenes from nature, such as this one, which is part of his cycle of choruses named after, for the lyrics of Polonsky. So here's just the beginning of the piece, Evening. I'm going to play only a few extracts simply to show you just some parts of Taneyev writing. Here it goes. And then the choir gently joins in. Some people describe Taneyev as rather dry composer in terms of emotions or lack of. I completely disagree, and I hope you join me here as well. There is another piece from the same cycle with lyrics of Polonsky, and this one is called The Ruins of a Tower, the Home of an Eagle. It starts quite unusual for Taneyev. It starts off with unison. Taneyev was well known as master of polyphony, and he was the notoriously well-known polyphony teacher of Rachmaninoff and Scriabin and many others, and he bombarded them with polyphony exercises. Anyway, here is a start of another piece by Taneyev. Yeah, so it starts off in octave unison with the triton being predominant in the entry phrase of this particular piece. Together, I would like us to listen to another sample of Taneyev's writing, the piece called Look How Gloomy It Is. Jason, if you can please be so kind to connect. Thank you. The choir that you have just heard performing is the choir of Moscow Conservatory, conducted by Boris Tavlin. If I move on from Taneyev to one of his famous students, Rachmaninoff, again, one cannot talk about the development of music in the 20th century without mentioning Rachmaninoff and at least partially touching his Vespers. So later on today, I'm going to talk about a particular recording of Vespers, which I think is really important for us to know. The text, Isabel, I'm reading the comment there. The text is about nature. Look how gloomy it is, and look at how the lights are dimming and how those lights are descending down onto the ground, onto the people. So that's the chorus you've just heard. So with Taneyev, where do I start? See, you've got his Aleko, of course, the opera which he composed as a graduation piece from Moscow Conservatory, with the well-known fact that Tchaikovsky, being the head of the jury, gave Rachmaninoff a 5, which is the top mark, with pluses on all the sides. So that's Aleko with choruses from Aleko. Then there is a choral concerto. And then, of course, there is the spring cantata, which we discussed last time. And of course, the bells, and also the 3 songs, which he composed later in life when he immigrated to United States. I would like to touch base just a tiny bit on his set of 6 choruses for female voices. It says for female voices or children's voices. One of those 6 choruses is called The Pine Tree. And I find it interesting that the start of it, at least for me, resembles that of Taneyev we've just heard. So it is for female voices plus piano. Etc. So that's very picturesque description of a pine tree. And in terms of performance skills, I think it is one of those pieces which are easily affordable by a children's choir, by a female chorus. The harmony is fairly simple. You do not have that much text in the music as well, and the tempo is fairly slow. Not to mention all the gorgeous melodies and Rachmaninoff style all through it. So this is just a sample from choruses. Here's 6 choruses for female voices. The cycle was composed when Rachmaninoff was 22, and the year for that cycle was 1895-96. So that's for the chorus you just briefly heard. I would like to draw your attention to Vespers. Again, there could be a separate lecture all on Vespers alone, looking at the structure of it and the history of it, etc. But I would like to talk about one particular performance of Vespers. So it was in preparation for such a lecture that I listened to quite a number of performances on YouTube. And in all of them, there was something which I thought could be improved, until I found this one performance where it all seemed perfect. And then I started investigating, and I was quite astonished, because that performance was created in 1965 by Sveshnikov Choir. And Sveshnikov was the director of the faculty, conductor's faculty at Moscow Conservatory, and one of the leading figures in choral education in general. He was also director of Moscow Conservatory for a number of years. So Sveshnikov Choir performing in 1965. And I was astonished, because I've got the score of Rachmaninoff, and this score was came up in 1989 as the first edition. It says here since 1922. So that music was not particularly encouraged to have been performed during the Soviet years, if I can say that. And all of a sudden, to come across the recording, the full recording, rather than just parts of Vespers, which people started to perform from 1980s onwards, I thought it was quite astonishing. So I started investigating further, and it then emerged, almost like a detective story, that it was a special commission by an American company to record this piece. So in connection with the Russian firm Melodia, or Melody, they did this recording of Vespers. And to make the recording as clear, the sound as pristine as possible, they recorded it at night in secret, closing down the big hall of Moscow Conservatory for any passerby, closing down the streets around the big hall of Conservatory, which is almost normal now, in the COVID situation, but certainly unheard of then, and recording that piece. If you can please listen to just an extract from that piece, please. But please pay particular attention to lack of breathing during the piece. I've selected an extract which is most often performed by choirs as a separate extract. You'll recognize it immediately. It's number 6. And quite often I hear choirs taking a breath at the end of each phrase. Usually with the Russian tradition, you take staggered breathing all the way through the section up until there is a quaver, 8-note rest right at the very end. So this is apart from that particular performance by Sveshnikov and his choir of Rachmaninoff Vespers. question. So the orkanye, or pronouncing or if it says or, pronouncing a where it says a, which is typical for church pronunciation. In comparison, so for example, Господи, so it is written as or, you'll pronounce it as or, whilst if you say it, you'll say Господи, Господи. So that is the difference between the singing, pronouncing literally as it is written, and you know, and reading it otherwise. So this is just a brief comment regarding pronunciation. If you take any of the scores of Vespers, you will have, such as by Vladimir Morozyan, for example, you will see the exact pronunciation guide. But in general, yeah, Lada, thank you for your question, but it's always consistent in church singing. What is interesting, Lada, that there are different traditions. For example, if you look at Ukraine, and Western Ukraine, so they will pronounce G as Господи. So you will have certain changes in tradition, but in general, I would say that the main thing is pronouncing the vowels as if all those vowels are accented. So A for A, or for or as the main ones. Okay, with Rachmaninoff, there are so many songs, there are so many compositions that he wrote for voices, for instruments, which were then transcribed or arranged for choruses. I would like to pay your attention to one particular piece, which is linked to my late conducting teacher, Anani Andrusenko. He was a professor of Moscow Conservatory up until 2001. And this year we're celebrating his 100th anniversary, which would have been his 100th anniversary. And among many things, we're creating a book of memories of people who worked with him and who sang with him and who were his students. He was also a well-known choral arranger. So I'd like us to listen to the piece that he has arranged. And that piece is used a lot as encore by Russian choirs. So the piece is, the original was Rachmaninoff's Romance, The Spring Waters, arranged for SATB choir. And then from that arrangement, I've also made my own arrangement for kids choir or ladies choir. So if anyone is interested in that, I can certainly pass the music to you later. So enjoy it. Spring Waters, arranged by Andrusenko. It is one of those pieces where, if you're wondering, should you play the piano part, should you conduct, or should you sing? I would say conducting is the easiest of the three, followed by singing, followed by, as you can guess, the piano part. If the piano is in front and center, if this is normal. That depends upon what the concert is. Yeah, well, the hall is big hall of Moscow Conservatory there, and I would imagine that they've had some other pieces going on. And yes, it is quite typical, I would say, for my good old days, as I remember myself. I was not singing in this particular performance, but yeah, so sometimes they put it back. Yes, there is a B flat. They have not gone for this yet. My students have at my school in the kids choir. So anyway, it all varies. And also probably I would have started a bit slower. The Androsyanka's family is here in the Zoom call. You can probably see, I don't know, a name in Russian. So this is Androsyanka's son, Stefan, composer, and his family. So this is a very brief talk about Rachmaninoff. Yeah, thank you. And I would now like to move on to Pavel Chesnakov, an astonishing figure of somebody who composed 500 pieces for choir, out of which 400 were religious, and vast majority of them composed prior to the revolution of 1917. Chesnakov, again, so his figure is linked very much to synodal choir. He was a student of Taneyev, and having graduated from synodal college, he then studied and then worked at Moscow Conservatory. And 4 years before his death, he wrote a book called Choir and How to Lead the Choir, which became one of the textbooks for choral conductors. I would like for us to listen to maybe a minute or so of one of his sacred pieces. And this piece is called Let My Prayer Be Heard, with Chvorostovsky as the singer. I'm sure you'll recognize him there. So maybe just a minute or so, please. Thank you. Thank you. Chesnakov died in 1944, a year before the war ended, and he died of heart attack, and they say that he died whilst standing in a queue for bread, and he died of malnourishment. And as far as I'm aware, there is still no monument on his grave at Vagankovskoye kladbiще in Moscow. So that was Chesnakov, and just one sample of many of his choral pieces, sacred and secular pieces, but that particular one was Let My Prayer Be Heard. From Chesnakov, I would like to move on to a composer. He was predominantly known for his orchestral music, Vissarion Yakovlevich Shebalin, who again was one of the directors of Moscow Conservatory, and particularly during the war years. So Vissarion Shebalin. And it was in 1948 he composed a cycle of pieces to the words of Pushkin and to the celebration of Pushkin, and Pushkin being one of the main, if not the main, Russian poet. So the text of this particular piece, called Winter Road, is something the following, so I'll just translate it word to word. So through the foggy day, foggy evening, you know, the man is taking a cart and going through the forest. The mood is gloomy, and he cannot even hear any song or anything. The only thing he can hear somewhere in front of him is a little triangle, the little bell ringing. So a typical Russian scene. enjoy it, and please listen specifically to the end of the piece. I'm sure you'll realize what I mean. So enjoy. So this is the Chebalin Winter Road. You just heard singing was the choir of the big choir of Russian TV and radio, conducted by Klavdiy Borisovich Ptitsa. Again, a legendary figure. So he was the head of the faculty of choral conducting for quite a number of years, and he was one of the leading figures, if not the leading figure, particularly at that time, and is considered one of the, one of the main musicians in choral conducting faculty in Russia in total. I'm sure you've heard the B-flat basses over there. And I have to say that I grew up thinking this is normal, because all the choirs I was in, there'll be somebody singing those notes or something close. So I never thought twice about it until I moved away from Russia and suggested to one of the choirs, you guys, you should sing the song. It's lovely, it's gorgeous. And the minute they saw the B-flat, they said, Irina, you're crazy. Who's going to sing this? So the piece is gorgeous even without that B-flat. So if you don't have
actually, Irina, but there's a really quick story. When I was studying in Moscow, there was I was singing with a youth choir there, about 17 or 18-year-olds, and I was singing with the basses. And then when we came down to those low B flats, they were all just going. They weren't actually singing notes. They were just singing that because I think their voices weren't old enough. And they assured me. They said, "Oh no," they said, "that actually from far away it sounds like a note." I said, "Oh really? That's interesting." So I went out and I had a listen, but it still sounded like.
I have a similar story. It'll come at the end. So anyway, you may have heard from me another story, more like an anecdote. you know, do Russians have particular anatomy? Is there anything in the water? Is there anything special going on? Anyway, so here's one of the anecdotes. If you've heard it, you know, here it comes again. So basically there's a line of bassists queuing up as auditions for this Russian choir. So the first bass comes in and, you know, the conducting panel is listening to him sing and then asks, so do you drink? And then he says, oh gosh, yeah, I have to confess, yes, I do. Well, sorry, but you can't be in our choir, you know, it's just not going to work, so sorry. So off he goes, and he tells the next bass in the queue, so whatever you say to them, just say, you do not drink. Sure. So the next bass comes in, and they ask the same question, so do you drink? Me? Gosh, no, I never drink. Well, how can you be a bass? So I'm certainly not reading further into this and not going into discussion, but I just simply think there is a larger pool of voices. There is clearly a tradition there which forces the bassist to exercise that lower register. And I would say that this is more behind it rather than anything particularly their drink or anything else. Talking about the gloominess, here is somewhat contrasting piece, although it is interesting, especially if you look at the words. So the next piece is a Russian folk song. I can put my bet that if I played it for you, asking to identify the composer, you would never identify it as Shostakovich. I'll be amazed if you did, because you think, really, Shostakovich, you know, arranging folk tunes? And Shostakovich arranged 2 folk songs. And this particular one is somewhat special in terms of character. Yes, it's called How I, a Young Maiden. But then if you look at the words are basically very satirical. And it goes into a family quarrel. And you can clearly hear it portrayed as word painting in this piece. So the original melody was picked up during one of the folklore exhibitions. So let's listen to number 5, please, yeah, which is Shostakovich, How I, a Young Maiden. It's very short, but exciting. Yeah. The choir singing this one is Moscow Youth and Students Choir, and I happen to be a member of it for quite a number of years when I lived in Moscow. So that's Shostakovich and his humoresque piece. Let's move on to Georgy Sviridov, who again I could not bypass doing even a quick overview over 20th century Russian music. I'm currently reading a book on Sviridov, and right on the cover page, I think it centralizes the way he sees Russia and the way a lot of his music is about. So he says, quote, "For me, Russia is the country of vast space, is the country of a song, is the country of gloominess, is the country of minor, and is the country of Christ." With this, I'd like us to listen to a short piece which can be performed separately, which has been published recently by OUP, Oxford University Press. And this is one of the pieces from his trilogy, from a cycle of 3 pieces. And this particular is called Holy Love. There are hardly any words except for the soloist, and the music is just utterly stunning. So this is Sviridov. Shostakovich was the one which you've just heard, you know, with a fast tempo and interesting meter in places. Whilst now we're moving on to Sviridov and his Holy Love. Jason, if you can please play the next one. Thank you. and then there's reprise of coming back. It's stunning. It's absolutely stunning. And if you're scared by looking at constantly changing meter, it is very easy if you follow the soloist. If you follow the soloist with the words, then conducting becomes absolutely simple. And the whole thing is just, yeah, very special, really special. Sviridov continues the line of being a melodist. So he certainly comes from Rachmaninoff and the Russian search for melody. But also you could see the changing meters, the irregular meters. And of course, there is a link to Znamenny chant. And in a lot of Russian music, and also in folk music, you would have that kind of meter. I would say one of the champions in irregular meters was Rimsky-Korsakov. So if you look back at one of his operas called Snegurочка, the Snow Maiden, there is a chorus there in 11/4. Свет и сила, Бог ярила, красное солнце наше, нет тебя в мире краше. So you've got 11/4. And in fact, when conductor looked at Rimsky-Korsakov and said, how are we meant to be conducting this? Then Rimsky-Korsakov came up with an astonishing phrase, which I then translated into Russian, and it comes out with word-to-word 11 syllables. So the Russian version is Rimsky-Korsakov совсем с ума сошел, and the English version is Rimsky-Korsakov is absolutely mad. Rimsky-Korsakov is absolutely mad. So the suggestion was from Rimsky-Korsakov to just keep on, saying that to maintain the 11/4 rather than trying to squeeze it into any kind of scheme. So that's in terms of how to deal with all those difficult time signatures. Holy Love is the piece. All these pieces and all the links that you're seeing now, you're listening to now, they're all part of the post that Toby has done, so you can all see those pieces later. And one more piece, just very short, maybe beginning first minute or so. This is a cycle by Sviridov called Pushkin Gallant. And again, the name of Pushkin as the leading Russian poet, and the very first movement out of 10 called Winter Morning. And it's describing the crisp snow and the excitement behind it. The middle section and the return of the reprise. So this is the beginning of his cycle, Pushkin Gallant. The choir you have just heard is Minin Choir, chamber choir conducted by Minin, who is in his 90s now. Again, one of the leading choral conductors and a huge, highly regarded specialist in choral music in Russian traditions. For many years, he taught at Gnesin Institute and was the director of Gnesin Institute. With Minin and his choir, I'd like to make a link to our penultimate composer, whose name is Valery Gavrilin, with a similar attitude and similar adoration for melody. In terms of the dates, and in general, so Gavrilin and Sviridov were very close to one another. They were friends, and they saw each other a lot, and sadly, Gavrilin only outlived Sviridov by 1 year, and he had a rather short life. He died at 59. With Gavrilin, one needs to understand not only, what time and what time period he was working through, but also looking back at his childhood. So he was born in 1939, and within the first few months of the war starting, his father was killed. that left his mother looking after 2 kids, and the mother was working at an orphanage. And then by forced declare of somebody, she was put into prison because she was falsely accused of stealing some corn, which never really happened. All she wanted to do was to save some food for those children, for the orphanage children, for orphanage school that she was at. And anyway, so the mother ends up in prison. The girl, Gavrilin's sister, is cared by some distant relatives, and Gavrilin is put into an orphanage himself. And it was at that orphanage that he was really lucky to have had a music teacher who discovered his talent. And when there was a situation where somebody from Leningrad, from St. Petersburg, came over looking for talents at schools, then it was owing to her persuasion. She actually went to that prison and persuaded Gavrilin's mother so that the boy should continue further studies as a musician. I'm going to play just a very short beginning part of his piece called Mama. If you type in Gavrilin Mama on YouTube, it will come in with multiple versions, but I'll just play so you can grasp the harmony. Second verse comes in. So that's Gavrilin Mama, and there are versions for children's choir with soloist who has all the words and the choir is just singing either R or closed mouth, and there are versions for SATB, a cappella choir, children's choirs with the piano accompaniment. But I'd like to play maybe part of the extracts from his massive choral cycle called the chimes, or symphony action, Symphony Действа, symphony action chimes. It's a symphony, but you have the percussion set there, and the percussion instruments, you've got oboe and soloists and the choir. So it's not really a symphony in true sense. And if anything, it's closer to a cross between oratorio and opera, and often choirs perform the whole thing without any action at all, whilst there are also performances involving action. I'd like us to listen to just one section, one movement from it called Evening Music, which is often performed separately, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to show you these pieces, to give you a chance or an opportunity to consider programming it without going into the entire cycle. So here is a piece called Evening Music from Chimes. got Gavrilin and his pieces, the chimes, and the first performer was Min and his choir, and it was in fact Vladimir Min, you know, that choral director, who asked the composer to write something special for the choir, and then it took some 15 years for the cycle to materialize. And when it came, it certainly became, I don't know, a revolution. It was so special. And finally, to finish off, let's have some fun. Listen to a couple of pieces which are hilarious. They're real exciting. They're super difficult. I believe I'm singing in these particular performances, but also there's a story which I'd like to share with you. So the final two pieces are composed by Shchedrin, Rodion Shchedrin, who is well known for lots and lots of pieces, and his suite, Carmen suite, and also for doing lots of ballet and being the husband of Maya Plisetskaya, you know, the famous ballet dancer. Anyway, so we're talking about the piece which has 4 movements called Concertino, and it was composed, it was commissioned by a festival, a choral festival in Ireland, in Cork, in 1982.
That's where I'm from. I went to the choral festival every year, and there were always loads of Eastern European and Russian choirs coming.
Amazing, amazing. Were you there at that particular time, Cathal? No?
1982? I would have been about 14 then, so possibly, but maybe not. I can't remember what age I started going.
So Rodion Shchedrin, he is very much linked to an institution in Moscow called the Choral College, named after Sveshnikov and now named after Popov, so another choral conductor. So a lot of Shchedrin's music is choir related, but these two last movements are just wicked. So the first one is called solfeggio or solfa, and yes, Russians always are encouraged to sing, or asked, not even encouraged to sing solfege at the start of set reading anything. So you'll just go straight into do re mi and you'll set read the piece. So that part is easy. So reading do re mi is not an issue, but reading that at speed is quite something. So, and then when that movement finishes, it is not movable do, it is a fixed solfege. So if it is a re, you call it re, you don't call it do. And you then move into the final part, and you've heard the idea of bells all the way through the pieces you've heard today. So in Gavrilin, in Sviridov, in Rachmaninoff. And Shchedrin finishes his cycle, his concertino, with the bells, the old Russian chimes as well. Anyway, but the point is, so that last movement, chimes, starts on low D with second basses. Yeah, and it would have been fine for us, you know, with the students' choir. However, there was a situation, we were somewhere on tour in France, and the night before the performance, we had some reception at a mayor of a town in France, and the boys drank a lot of beer. I'm not sure why it was beer rather than wine, but anyway, so it was beer, and as a result, when they came down to that last chimes and trying to produce a low D with the word boom, there was nothing coming out. Like literally, as Cathal was showing earlier, nothing coming out. And then the trick is that, well, it's a cappella piece, and all of us are then staggering our notes on top of that bass's low D. So the conductor shows, you know, the entry, and there's nothing happening. He turned absolutely pale. He showed another entry, and then somehow they scraped up a D or something close to it. Not in the performance you're going to hear, but just in that situation. And then somehow, shakingly, we then found our notes and continued. Anyway, so after that performance, the conductor got us together and said, you guys, you know, if you drink, your problem, but if you drink, at least think of what you're drinking. It should not be beer. Because, you know, it will most likely affect your ability to sing those low notes. Why could you not go for cognac or vodka instead? So partially a joke, but true story. Let's listen to both of these two pieces, please, one after another, Jason, if you can. So solfege from Shchedrin's cycle, followed by those chimes, the Russian chimes, and that's the choir I was in, and you can probably find me somewhere there as well, standing.
Where? We want to know where.
Right. Woo-hoo. We're done. This is what I prepared for you, and I hope you enjoyed it. It was quite a difficult task for me to try and pick up some pieces or snippets of pieces in some situation to give an overview over the time period so dear to any musician. And I really hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions.
And thanks, Irina. Did you say that the list of all these pieces and the links is in? Toby already sent them out, did he?
They're all on the page for Conductors in Isolation. If you see the title there, but without the link, that means that's the piece which I played at the piano myself.
Right. No, there was a wonderful contrast of music, Irina. Thanks so much. Really interesting to hear. And some of them, as you say, some of them quite approachable for a Western audience. Not too difficult.
Absolutely.
And some of them unapproachable as well. But
even in Shostakovich's piece, if you look at the score, you'll realize there's only sopranos that have the words. Yes, there's a mouthful of words, but it's only sopranos. So get a few Russians into that soprano part and let them deal with it. Whilst the rest of the choir just singing da, 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 and then they join for the final verse. Thank you. And
sure, I'll get it with a little coaching.
So I saw an earlier question from Max about that piece with the piano accompaniment by Rachmaninoff. Is the Spring Waters, is there the Romance for soprano originally, and the arrangement by my late conducting teacher. He has done 30, 40 arrangements, phenomenal arrangements. And there's also Vocalist, you know, the one with, again, was for soprano, but Vocalist for SATB choir a cappella, fantastic score. I have 22 of them over here. They've never been published. Some of them have, only 5 have been published, but vast majority have not. And we, his students, are really trying to make things change and hoping that at least some of the arrangements by Andrusenko will be published.
we should unmute ourselves and give Irina a round of applause. That's a tradition.
Thank you so much.
Oh, Irina. Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you for introducing us to such lovely music.
Irina, can I ask just a question about those, that's ladder, can you hear me? I wanted to ask about if there is any information you could give us about those oktavshiki, the basses who sing an octave lower. Is it a specific tradition? Was it added on, or is it just a tradition of the?
I think it gradually became a tradition, ladder, because when Rachmaninoff came up with his Vespers and gave it to Kastelsky, who it is dedicated to, the first thing Kastelsky exclaimed was, "Oh my gosh, where am I going to get those basses? They're as rare as asparagus for Christmas." I think from then on, you'd notice that all these composers, but all of us just put the low bass. And even if it doesn't say a low bass in Rachmaninoff, when you listen to Sveshnikov's choir, almost by default, okay, enough the bar, octave lower, or the very.
It's a kind of a question of I can do this. Watch me.
There's a bit of as well.
Yeah.
So, Irina, Simon, whilst it's not written, what we're suggesting is it's a little like what we do with double basses sometimes. If they've got the extra string, we'll ask them just to take a little bit further down. But are you suggesting that quite often these things are not actually printed in the scores, yeah?
If you look at the Rachmaninoff's piece, if you look, I have it even here. So if you look at that movement which we've listened to,
Yeah.
six.
Hello?
Yeah, the penultimate note is going upper C. And then that's the end. However, in Sveshnikov choir and in a lot of choirs, what they do is the following.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can just about get there. Lada was suggesting that Welsh voices I can get as far as a D on a really, really good day, and a note that's audible, but also a C. But B flat is just beyond what people are capable of here. And luckily, as Carl has said himself, being in Russia a lot, as I have been over the last 6 or 7 seasons, you get to hear that sound often. And it's addictive when you hear it, when you can hear somebody singing it. And especially if it's in like a small group, 5 or 6 singers, all males, and then you've got the octave at the bottom. It is quite something.
Gives the shivers down the spine.
Oh yeah. Even if you're not Russian, it still gets you right there.
Absolutely. And then what you do with dynamics. So with Rachmaninoff, you can see diminuendo. Well, you tell those second basses anything, anything. You know.
Yeah. Anything you
The rest
want.
of the choir disappears and you say yes, yes, yes. And you'll then pull them out like a soloist at the end of the performance. You know,
Yeah. Well, anyway, bravo. Great evening's entertainment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Irina, could I ask a question? I'm very interested in what you said when we were listening to the Rachmaninoff Vespers, the Sveshnikov choir, singing with consistent staggered breathing and never stopping at the end of phrases. That's something that I hadn't heard before. I wonder, are there any other Russian choir performance practices that you can think of that perhaps choirs on this side of Europe don't perhaps know, or that could be useful for us to consider?
Kevin, what I would say, thank you so much for the question. What I would say, that there's a tradition of singing Rachmaninoff that way, singing Vespers that way. So you take the majority of Russian choirs, if not all of them, and you'll hear the same staggered breathing in this particular movement, which is why I deliberately chose it, to show that sometimes choirs kind of copy one another. And if they hear, you know, a choir doing one way, I think, okay, this is kind of fine. But I would say, I thought a lot about it. I was wondering where that tradition came from. And this is my own opinion. Perhaps there's something to do with the Russian church, where the congregation really is not meant to be part of the performance. Yeah, there's quite a clear division between the choir singing in a church service. Yeah, and then the congregation kind of listening. And yes, there are a couple of pieces where they join in, that you certainly would not hear the Russian choirs joining in. In the West, you have the verse. You often have the organ, and very clear division at the end of the verse. Okay, here comes the second verse, and that makes a clear end of phrase. So I would say that could be one of the reasons why you have that, as well as to emphasize the length of phrase. In my opinion, in this particular piece, if you take a breath and at the end of each phrase, it sounds choppy.
So are you saying that so would this be particularly idiomatic of the Rachmaninoff, particularly the Bogroditsyjevo, or like would you use it, for example, in the Nikolai Kedrov Otche Nash?
It is used a lot, and there are different, you know, there is a tradition of singing Rachmaninoff. And with Rachmaninoff, I would say the tradition is to have that staggered breathing and to follow the rest. If it says the rest, only take it there when it clearly says that. And I've heard lots of other performances of other pieces, such as a Spy and his Krinitsi, for example. That's another piece. Initially, when I was preparing this lecture, I prepared 12 pieces. And then I timed myself, and I thought, oh my word, I can barely get into an hour with 8 of them. So my other 4 pieces went. So if you're interested, I can send you a link to Eshpai. Yeah, thank you, Richard. Andrei Eshpai and his piece Krinitsi. Again, stunning piece. And when I initially thought of including it, I listened to a number of performances, and that varies. There are some choirs which indeed maintain that Rachmaninoff type throughout the entire piece, like without a single breath. And yeah, you get certain beauty from it, you get certain tension from it. Whilst there are some others who make those changes. In other words, it depends.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So basically, it's not universal, that tradition of singing staggered breathing.
I would say with Rachmaninoff and Vespers, yes.
Yeah.
But otherwise, no.
Right. Okay.
The multiple, even with Sidelnikov, you know, that piece which I introduced you to last time, Sidelnikov, Romancer and his Memento. There are some choirs who maintain that continuous singing all the way through the piece, while some others that follow and the phrase, take a breath, and the phrase, take a breath.
Just observation, the last piece with a very low Ds from the basses you mentioned, it's ladder. It sounded to me like the Tibet monks when they chant, wasn't it? It was such a specific sound, and it's just by association. I'm thinking whether there is some kind of a connection to Mongolia, even, you know, and the kind of a really visceral sound low making. But that's just my fantasy. It just was so striking if you ever listened to Tibetan monks singing that kind of nearly throat sound.
What we can do is ask Shidrin. He's alive.
Oh yes, let's write to him.
We can write to him and ask.
We can invite him on to give us a lecture.
Absolutely. He's amazing. Amazing.
It was amazing. Thank you, Irina.
My pleasure. I enjoyed it too. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Lovely.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow.
Really
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Да,
Irina.
спасибо.
Thanks, Irina. Thank you so
Thanks
much.
so much.
Пока.
До свидания. Пока.
Thank you, Irina.
My pleasure. Thank you for tuning in.
Sure.